Well, I'm going to get started right away. Hope you enjoy this ride through Alabama, heading to Shelbyville, Tennessee, which is just south of Nashville. I'm coming out of Summit, Mississippi. Got this load of chicken last night and got a parking spot at the TA there. That was a blessing. But let's get to the topic. Now, I know a lot of people don't like talking about anything like this or whatever. They run away from it. Well, you can run away from it. You can bury your head in the sand or put your hands over your eyes like a child. But the scary thing is still there. It doesn't go away just because you pretend not to see it. And yeah, these things are going to be affecting everybody. Maybe not right away, but eventually we'll have a ripple effect and everybody will feel it. And what else should we be talking about? That's my question. But we have a president just declared a national emergency on Cuba. Cuba doesn't bother anybody. Ever since the 1960s, we've had, I think Obama lifted it in his administration. That's why everybody was raving about getting Cuban cigars. I've had one. No big deal. Hell, you can buy them in Canada. You can buy them in Mexico. I've brought a couple of them across the border with me, right in my pocket where they can see them. Walked right back into my own country with them. Gave one to my fleet manager at the time because he is a connoisseur of fine wines and cigars. Like, what's the deal with Cuba? People need to really learn about certain countries before you criticize. Everybody criticizes all these countries and everything, and they don't know a damn thing about them. Just what you're comfortable hearing on the TV, you believe and accept without question. Well, Cuba had a revolution in 1959 itself. Like a lot of other countries over the centuries had their revolutions. Well, they had their revolution in 59 and removed the dictator Bautista. And then he went into exile over in Spain, where he lived out the remainder of his life. But yeah, Fidel Castro led that revolution. But did he become the leader, the dictator? No, he didn't. He installed as leader, as the president, Manuel Leo for a while. But it didn't seem to work out, and there was still corruption. So they got rid of him and brought in Osvaldo Torrado. Forgive me if I didn't say the name right. And he was part of the Populist Socialist Party. So, the title of the story that I got, Trump declares, because of the communist regime there. What are you talking about? Communist regime? Now, they can call their political party whatever they want, but communism is a community of workers who work together for mutual interest instead of the capitalist way where the workers create a massive surplus for a tiny minority to enjoy and don't have to do any of the work. No, in this version, they decide what is done with the wealth afterward, not a tiny minority of people like a Jeffrey Bezos. But there are many different types, but nobody in the world has ever achieved communism. They're socialist. Socialism is the means to achieve communism. And there's a big difference. But thanks to a long Cold War, 70 years of this bullshit, that's what people believe. That it's evil and everything else. Capitalism is the only way. Well, capitalism. Look at there's a bunch of different economic systems in human history. But the main three is feudalism, slavery, and capitalism. Now you look at all three of those. In feudalism, the feudal lords collect the surplus from the serfs, and the lords decide what to do with it. In slavery, y'all know the slaves create a massive surplus down south, and you can still see the plantations that still exist. That the money they used to build those plantations. They saw what they wanted to do with the surplus. In capitalism, the employees make a massive surplus for the employers to enjoy. Now, mind you, only 3% of Americans are employers. Tiny minority. It's the same dichotomy. And that's the dichotomy we need to get away from. And people have done it successfully over the years. It's called worker co-ops. Look at Minnesota, look at Wisconsin, and Western Iowa. And the San Francisco and Oakland, the Bay Area in California. The Arizmendi Bakeries is a good example. Named after a priest that's been long dead. Father Arizmendi. He was the priest at a church in Mondragon, Spain, in the Basque area. It's south of the Pyrenees Mountains that separates France and Spain. And it was a very poor part of this country. And in 1956, him and 6 of his parishioners, he said, if we sit here and wait for a capitalist to invest in our town and give us jobs, we'll all die of old age. So what I suggest is we become our own employer. And they start a worker co-op. Look up Mondragon, Spain today. It's over 200 to 250 co-ops. It's a conglomerate. The town has I think 120,000 people. Everybody has a job, everybody works, but there ain't no poor people, and there isn't no people living in poverty. Well-developed system. They even got a university called the Mondragon University to teach anybody about worker co-ops. That's our future, if you want it. But now we're going to turn the page to this ICE situation where another man was gunned down, found out he's an ICU nurse. I've seen every video there is available. And the video that's most important and the one to keep an eye on is the one in the gray uniform that walked up and took his gun away from him, the man that got shot up. Before anything got started, he took his gun away. The ICU nurse, I can't remember his name, that was gunned down, never brandished his weapon, and he can legally carry by law. Second Amendment, that the Republicans preach about. Make sure you know about it. He had a cell phone in one hand and with his other hand trying to help a woman that they shoved to the ground. So they jumped him. The man in the gray uniform came over, took his gun away, and all of a sudden, one shot rang out, and then 9 more followed it in rapid succession. Now, when I looked at that, I told everybody after what happened to Miss Good in her car. And I like the one group, I can't remember their name, that did forensics on this. That man was not threatened by that car at all because he was fully extended with his arms, and that's 2 to 3 feet. To extend your arms out without his pistol hitting the car or getting hit by the car or whatever, he was nowhere near her. He was at least 3 feet from the car to be fully extended with his pistol. and fired 3 rounds. That's the first summary execution that I know. And this other one, downright summary execution. Now, I try to correct people, they love throwing out, history and things of that nature, like 1930s Germany. Okay, look, the SS, they're not yet, okay? The way things that ICE is doing is like the SA, the stormtroopers, the brown shirts. Although they didn't run around with guns and everything and body armor and Kevlar helmets. Mm-mm. They were in a nicely pressed uniform, and the only weapon they had was maybe a billy club. That was it. And they did predominantly the same thing that our ICE agents are doing today. That's why I had mentioned it at that Love's truck stop in Texas when it was drastically quiet. Because, yeah, they were worried about what these ICE agents were going to do. They were getting coffee, and they were mumbling against each other. And I come walking in, I saw them. And I can't stand silence when that many people are in a room. And when I saw them, I looked at the girls over there, what they were doing. They looked at me, and then looked over at them, and then I looked back at them. So I'm like, I'll go ahead and do it. I yelled out, "Oh, that says height!" That's German for attention SSSA. Before the meeting got started with those two groups, that's what you would hear one of the operas shout out. Well, they looked over at me. And then they asked me if I'm an American citizen. I'm like, are you joking? Because I carry my lanyard around my neck, ID everything. I'm like, don't blame me for having an education beyond the 7th grade. I speak multiple languages. Just because I can speak those languages doesn't mean that I'm foreign. And to tell you the truth, I'm half native. And I said, you can do what you want. But in the end, how this is going to end up, you're going to lose your job and go to jail, and I'm going to get paid. Point blank. You're going to lose your job and go to jail, and I'm going to get paid. Well, the words between us and them didn't last very long after that. I got what I needed, and they were heading out the door. And then as they were leaving, I said, "Das Stile der Deutsche Reich!" That's another little fine slogan you would have heard back then in Germany. Nothing against my German friends, just giving you a dose of history, how it echoes. Doesn't necessarily repeat, but it echoes. And one of them turned around that looked at me, and then I said to him, "Deutschland über alles." And he asked me, "What is that?" And he was laughing. I said, "That was the forerunner of Make America Great. That means make Germany great again." So I love to have fun. Not at people's expense, but to make a point. Now, when they started the summary executions, yes, now they're acting like the SS did. I've been waiting for an episode, of The Night of the Long Knives, or I'm waiting for Trump to have his Reichstag moment. And then if you read about that, what happened afterward, where him as president of the Reichstag named himself total leader because Hindenburg passed away. So he merged the two together and became the total leader. That's why in one of the speeches translated, you hear him say, "I am the leader of the German people now." And Reichsmarshal Goering was right, at least in my view. What Germany did up until 1938, I totally agreed with. But when they invaded Poland, that was where I drew the line. Something should have been done there politically. If I was living in Germany and had the Führer's ear, I would have talked him out of it and say, like, let's do something else here. Let's try to work something out. But we got back to territories that were wrongfully taken from us in the Versailles Treaty and fixed the issue of World War One, where Germany got blamed for it, in which they didn't start it. Serbia did. But you're not going to be told that. Now, I didn't learn all this in school or in higher learning here in the United States. I learned this from going over to Germany, going to the Berlin Library and the Trier Library, and talking to educated people and getting the whole story and get a better understanding of what was going on then that caused the people to follow in destruction. And they were just like us. I'd say they were a bit smarter on the grand scale, but because there are a lot of dumbasses that live in this country. Well, I shouldn't have said that. Well, undereducated, let's put it that way. They think they got common sense, and that's good enough. But no, common sense is common. I look for uncommon sense, logical sense. That's what I look after. But Christy Nome and Cash Patel, that looks like a deer in headlights. Every time I see that guy, I'm like, I'm surprised some hunter hasn't shot his ass thinking that he's a deer because of those eyes, Said, he shouldn't have came to, nobody comes to a rally armed with a gun. Okay, how many clips he had was irrelevant. And I'd like to see proof of how many clips he did have. Now, granted, I bet you he did have one in the gun, yeah, which typically have anywhere between 7 to 9 rounds in it, depending on the make or whatever. Oh, and that you're going to get shot to death for legally bringing in a weapon. Well, go back to the first Trump administration where the anti-fascists were doing their rallies and protests, and the Proud Boys showed up with their AR-15s and OD Greens with a 50 magazine with 50 rounds in it, with extra magazines too. They were armed to the teeth. Let alone an underage 17-year-old going over state lines from Antioch, Illinois to Wisconsin. I just had a brain fart, can't remember the town, but everybody knows the story. Somebody that's under the age of 18 is not supposed to be carrying a firearm without adult supervision. Okay? Kyle Shittenhouse ended up shooting 3 people, killing 1 or 2, I can't remember. And he gets off. He totally gets exonerated. But he still broke the law. And so do the adults that were supposedly in charge. A minor going over state lines with a firearm. He had an AR-15 on a sling. No telling how many magazines he had with him, but it was a 50 clip or a magazine with 50 rounds in it. And where was his adult supervision when he did the shooting? Oh, about 2 or 3 blocks away. That's not adult supervision. But the right wing thought it was okay for Kyle Shittenhouse to have an AR-15, underage, mind you, and shoot 3 unarmed people. To where this guy didn't brandish his gun and didn't threaten anybody, was trying to help a lady, got shoved to the ground, didn't have the firearm in his hand. No video shows him having that in his hand. The only time you saw it was when the guy, the ICE agent in the gray uniform, took it from him out of his own holster. That's the kind of country America is right now. That's why I don't recommend anybody coming here for vacation. Although I've looked ever since the beginning of this year, there had been a bit of a boom, people starting to vacation here, which is strange. But you got to mention everything. Just like everybody laughed at when Trump said that gasoline was $1.99. He didn't know that for certain, and he has no control over the pricing. But the one who did have control over the pricing, the I can't remember his name. He owns the Love's travel stops, which are truck stops also for the most part. And I'm assuming he was a Trump supporter. And you know what? I did the video from Missouri when I showed everybody that, yeah, gasoline's $1.99. There you go. You got to be right by accident sometime. But I always point out when somebody was right. Well, Trump and no president has control over oil prices. The three major boards of directors of the three major American oil companies do. They decide what the price of oil goes for. And then the gas station owners, like the owner of the Loves, decide how much he's going to charge for the gas. Diesel is still almost $4, though. Per barrel of oil, you get 2 gasoline and 3 barrels of diesel. We got a surplus of diesel, I do know that, but and yet they're charging us more than gasoline. You figure that one out and think about it yourself. But before that one I did in Missouri, it was too late. I couldn't do a video or take a picture of it, but it was in Ardmore, Oklahoma, heading south on I-35, going into Texas. It was $1.99 there. That was 2 weeks before I did the one of the video. But if you're willing to drive that far to get $1.99 gasoline, I'll let everybody know it. But anywhere else in the country, I haven't seen it. Just that one place in Missouri and the one place in Oklahoma. That's the only places I've seen $1.99 gas. And you damn right, a truck driver is the best person to ask seeing fuel prices. Because yes, we pay attention. Especially your owner ops. Because we try to stop and get fuel where we get the best and cheapest deal. Because the less we spend on fuel, the more profit we make. Business 101. Anyway, I didn't want to have a panel, and I didn't really want to make this that long. But I do go to other countries, folks, okay? Most people don't. And I always ask the question, what are you basing your analysis on that we're so much better than all these other countries? I'll tell you about all the other ones over in Europe and Canada. At least they don't go bankrupt having to see a doctor. Here's another something to think about. But today is the 30th. And tomorrow, don't be surprised if the government don't shut down. Because a lot can happen after the government shuts down. A lot of pieces can be moved that are already planned out. And I had mentioned that before. Not saying it's going to happen, but it's a possibility. Those with abstract thought that look at the grand picture and can figure things out and see which way things can be going. I'm just pointing it out that it could happen. But this is embarrassing. Very embarrassing. And I blame everybody in government. They're all standing there like dumb beasts, just doing photo ops and interviews that sound good, but not physically doing anything to stop any of this. And okay, back to the Epstein files. I'm never going to let that go. Why isn't somebody thrown in jail for disobeying a court order? Namely, our FBI head and the Attorney General. The bikini model, one of them. Why are they not in jail? They were court ordered to release the Epstein files unredacted. And they still haven't done it. They're just making a joke of our judicial system. And for doing that, all of them are going to go up for aiding and abetting. You get charged just as much as the perpetrator. They're aiding and abetting a pedophile and all the others. And everybody goes like, well, where's your proof? And when I give them proof, I don't ever hear from them again. Katie Johnson, there are plenty of old videos from back in the day telling her experience with Donald Trump at the age of 13. But if you're not willing to look it up and watch the videos and think it's fake and all this other stuff, you can pretend all you want. But that has already been known for quite some time. But everybody just refused to see it and hear it and pretend it doesn't exist. But I'm glad that some people were able to come in here. I appreciate it. I wish I could have had a panel. It's a lovely day here in Alabama. But I got to get fuel here at the TA. And you guys have a good day. And believe me, if you have a real question that you want to ask, just put it in the comments and I'll answer it. But if it's ridiculous, I'll answer it and then have you may reword it into a question that everybody can understand that makes sense. You guys have a good day, and you can hope for the future, but I'm trying to be optimistic, folks, but that's not realistic. You guys have a good day. Bye-bye.